Greetings again, 121. In this video, I'm going to go over the last full chapter. This will be part 1 of chapter 15, Europe Transformed, Reform, and State Building. And we're attempting to answer that outcome question, the different characteristics of those different Protestant faiths, which is what the Reformation of the 16th century was all about. As new monarchies arose, especially in France, England, and Spain at the end of the 15th century, there are going to be political repercussions of these developments. And an interesting writer of the time was Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote the first modern political book. It's considered to be modern because he is not talking about virtue as being something absolute. You may have to do something unvirtuous or unethical or perhaps not Christian if you are going to maintain your power base as a ruler. And this is where the idea of the end justifying the means comes in. This is a Machiavellian principle. Sometimes you must do dastardly things in order to keep in power. And this is a break with Aristotle and the Greeks and the Romans and the classical ideas of morality. In other words, efficacy or effectiveness is more important in the modern political world than the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome of virtue. And again, this is an ongoing question in political philosophy. What is virtue? The European economies are gradually recovering from the upheavals of the Black Death during the 1300s. The Italians in the Hanseatic League in North Germany are still powerful. In France, the First Estate still guides people towards spiritual ends. The Second Estate provides the security, and the overwhelming majority of people in France are in the Third Estate. Another huge technological change during the 16th century is Gutenberg's printing press. And he developed a movable type that is used for the vernacular or the everyday languages of people. So now it's not just books being printed in Latin like the Bible that are the only source of written materials. You now have books that are written in everyday languages. And with this, the spread of knowledge increases tremendously. This is the internet of its day, ladies and gentlemen. This is a huge invention, and it greatly impacts Europe. The Renaissance learning then spreads because of Gutenberg Press. These are some other interesting individuals. Desiderius Erasmus popularized Christian humanism, in other words, the ability of human beings to improve life here on earth. Humanism is always concerned with that. Life now, not life in the hereafter as it was in the Middle Ages. And that's what most of the philosophers like Aquinas were concerned with in those eras. No longer. It's now about improving this life using reason and education and other ideas of the Enlightenment in order to change society. You have to change the people in the society in order to improve it. And Erasmus stressed inner piety and the philosophy of Christ as a guide to daily living, as opposed to the dogmatic beliefs and practices of the medieval church. Girolamo Savonarola preaches for reform in Florence. He was against secularism, and he is later executed for heresy or non-church teachings that get you in hot water with the Roman Catholic Church, which has serious problems with corruption in the early parts of the 16th century. Pope Julius personally led armies against enemies in those early 1500 years, and many popes had been living very, very luxurious and monarchical type lives. Lower priests were actually marrying, gambling, or drinking too heavy, and ordinary people were demanding certainty of salvation. So what the church came up with was the sale of indulgences, which are attached to a relic, and in turn for paying this indulgence, your time in purgatory as punishment for sin allegedly is going to be greatly reduced. As the coin in the coffer clings, your soul from purgatory springs. And there is nothing in the Bible about the use of relics and the sale of indulgences. And this is what Martin Luther was talking about in the 95 Theses. His study of the Bible led to the conclusion that humans are not saved through their good works, but through faith, and faith alone in the promises of God and Jesus Christ. He attacked the sale of indulgences because this created the perception that people are buying their way into heaven. And he tacked those theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg in Germany. Don't pay attention to any page numbers. This is an old outline based on an old textbook. And as they are copied and printed and distributed all over Germany, this begins the Reformation, the movement for the religious reform of the Catholic Church. And eventually, this is going to turn into a new faith, the Protestant faith of the Christian Church, which emphasizes the doctrine of salvation or justification by grace through faith alone. Please be familiar with this. This is the idea of the Reformation. This results in Luther being excommunicated, and he is summoned before the Reichstag, the German government, to recant his heresies. He refuses, and in response, Charles V issued the Edict of Worms, which made Luther an outlaw and a heretic. The Reichstag is outraged by his refusal to recant. It demanded his arrest, but Frederick of Saxony, Frederick the Wise, saved him and protected him. And while sheltered, Luther then translated the New Testament into German, which is then printed in the thousands and distributed. And he eventually will return to Wittenberg in 1522, and many of the ideas are in practice. And eventually a separate church called the Lutherans is formed based on the teachings of Luther. There are three main ideas: faith, only, Bible for salvation. Faith, only, Bible ensures salvation in heaven. If you believe in God as a Protestant and say that you profess belief in God, you are going to heaven. Luther also institutes new services for the Mass. Sermons are conducted in German and not Latin. And he gets married to a former nun, Katharina. And this provides a new model for the faith. The new Protestant minister will be a married clergy. And what else happens now as a result of this German Reformation? The Holy Roman Emperor of the time, Charles V, is a Spaniard, and he rules over all of these different areas. Bohemia, Hungary, the Low Countries, which are sometimes called the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and the Kingdom of Naples in southern Italy. Politically, he wants to maintain this empire. Religiously, he wants to maintain the unity of the Holy Roman Empire under Catholicism. As word of these Reformation ideas spread, there is a peasants' revolt in Germany. They wanted to end serfdom, and they began revolting. And Luther does not approve of this. He is a very conservative minister. And he urges princes to suppress the revolts. And the armies did. They massacred as many as 100,000 people. And Luther became discredited for a time. Germany then goes to war as the Protestants fight Catholics. And basically, northern Germany supports Lutheranism, southern Germany supports Catholicism and the Pope. And princes who signed a loyalty oath to the Pope agreed to fight against Luther. And that's where the idea of Protestant, the name, comes from. They are protesting princes. These northern princes do not want to be part of the Catholic faith anymore. And eventually this comes to describe all non-Catholic Christians. And despite some victories militarily, Charles V could not force the Protestants back into the Catholic Church. And in 1555, he ordered all German princes to meet at Augsburg, where it was decided under the Peace of Augsburg that the faith in all the different provinces of Germany will be chosen by the prince. And basically what we just described in northern and southern Germany is going to hold. The north is Protestant, the south is more Catholic. There's more sects that will develop in the Protestant religion. One of them is centered in Switzerland under Zwingli. He helped to eliminate monasticism and veneration of saints, clerical celibacy, and the Pope's authority. He tried to get an alliance with Luther, but the two could not agree on certain interpretations, specifically over the meaning of the Last Supper. And Zwingli was eventually killed fighting against Catholic armies in 1531. Another reformer was John Calvin. He is the Protestant radical. Calvinism believes that since the beginning of time, God has known who was going to be saved. This is the idea of predestination. God He chose very few people to save. The elect are saved, and the reprobate are not. There is no certainty of salvation because it's already been determined. And his teachings became known as Calvinism. Calvinism basically is a theocracy. And Geneva, Switzerland will be run as a theocracy, a government controlled by religious leaders. And the consistory was a special body that enforced moral discipline. It was a crime to dance, to sing obscene songs, to be drunk, to play cards, or swear. Geneva became a model city of highly moral citizens, and it is the center of Protestantism. And Calvinism will spread, and missionaries were sent to all parts of Europe seeking this. In England, the English Reformation will come about because Henry VIII wanted a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. She did not give him a son. The Pope refused to grant him a divorce. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, will avoid the marriage. Henry married Anne. She had Elizabeth, who will become the future queen. And this is where the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, starts, because Henry VIII needed to get divorced. The Anglican Church is very similar to the Roman Catholic Church in their practices and mores of their services and sermons. It's very similar. But it's Henry's church because he needed to get divorced. He dies in 1547. His son succeeded him. He was a very sickly child. And Edward was succeeded by Mary, who attempted to move England back to Catholicism. Bloody Mary burned 300 plus Protestant heretics, as she saw it, burned them at the stake. And this angered many. And this actually pushed England into a more Protestant direction. The Anabaptists are also radicals. It is a voluntary association of the individual who has gone through a spiritual rebirth. Basically, they believe in adult baptism, not baptism as a child. And they believe in a complete separation of church and state. They are pacifist and communal. And these are the forerunners, the Anabaptists, of Mennonites, the Amish people who are in the eastern part of Ohio and Pennsylvania in the United States. The Quakers, there's also the huge faith that they founded the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Baptists, who are a huge Protestant faith in the south of the United States. What was the social impact of the Protestant Reformation? It eliminated the idea of celibacy as being something special, and mutual love between man and woman is the basis of marriage, but socially the role of women remains unchanged. You still have to raise children and be obedient to your husband. And both Calvin and Luther believed that this was the duty of women. Out of this came the Catholic Reformation, and there are three pillars. The first one is founded by Ignatius of Loyola. It is the Jesuit group that made total allegiance to the Pope, and they found superb Catholic schools throughout Europe, and they are committed to Catholic education and missionary work, basically to stop the spread of Protestantism. And they were successful in reconverting parts of Germany and Eastern Europe. Francis Xavier will carry this message to India, Malacca, and Japan. but he died of a fever before he ever reached mainland China. Francis Xavier was very, very admirable in his comments about the Japanese. Matteo Ricci will have success in China, converting many to Christianity. And eventually the papacy will reform. Pope Paul III had the College of Cardinals investigate the sale of indulgences, and the Council of Trent in 1547 decided these things. The church interpretation, the Roman Catholic Church interpretation, is final. Salvation is through faith and good works. Bible and church tradition are both authorities. The sale of indulgences is valid, but the selling of them is prohibited. What is the legacy of the Reformation? Religion no longer unified Europe. Individual monarchs and nation states gained power. And this revolt lays the groundwork for the future rejection of the Christian beliefs in later centuries. And this set the stage for the modern world. And this will end part 1.